On today's Star Wars Factions Compared video, we'll be looking at the flagships of 4 factions from Star Wars Legends and canon. Hey guys, this is EckhartsLadder. Hello and welcome to another episode of Star Wars Factions Compared, the series where we look in depth at major factions from the Star Wars universe and other science fiction. Today we are looking at the Empire and the New Republic from Star Wars Legends, as well as the First Order and the Confederacy of Independent Systems from canon. We'll be looking at the Dreadnoughts and Super Dreadnoughts of the Star Wars universe, trying to figure out which one is best. If you'd like to watch past episodes of this series, make sure to check out the playlist I've put down in the description. If you'd like to have your idea made into a video, put it down in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe with notifications on so you're here first. Let's get right into the content now. We'll start with the Empire, and the Empire in Star Wars Legends had many different flagships. Darth Vader himself had both an Imperial 1 class Star Destroyer, a Super Star Destroyer, and other ships. Today, however, we're looking at the ultimate of the Empire ships, the Eclipse class Super Star Destroyer. Now, I've talked about the Eclipse many times on this channel. In fact, I did a whole video on why I didn't believe the Eclipse was the greatest ship in Star Wars Legends. However, my argument in that video was based on the ship's lack of flexibility and a difficulty operating alone. Here, however, we're looking at it as a flagship. Having the Eclipse be the center of a fleet actually makes a lot of sense. Although it is extraordinarily slow, its engines are relatively small compared to the rest of the ship, and it is incredibly massive, it has an unparalleled amount of firepower and is very difficult to destroy. In fact, we've never seen an Eclipse destroyed by conventional means, i.e. by another capital ship. When supported by a fleet, the weaknesses of the Eclipse are minimized while its strengths can be effectively utilized. For example, one of the main issues with the Eclipse is a lack of maneuverability. This would allow enemy ships to get behind it and do serious damage. However, with a supporting fleet, Star Destroyers or other vessels could be positioned in vulnerable areas to allow the Eclipse to continue without having to reposition itself. Similarly, the Eclipse can also reposition its cumbersome laser without having to worry about enemy ships getting into a strategically advantageous position. The Eclipse was the most massive dreadnought ever produced by the Empire in Star Wars Legends. Its super laser is powerful enough to destroy any enemy capital ship in a single shot. It was also nearly impenetrable, and besides having cloning facilities for Emperor Palpatine, also had top-of-the-line technology, including droid starfighters. The Eclipse is basically a high-tech, impenetrable fortress. Although it does have some weaknesses and isn't necessarily flexible, when protected by a fleet, it's dangerous and very effective. The Eclipse's super laser, although not unique within the Star Wars universe, is still very rare, and it allows it to effectively siege planets, take on enemy fleets, and intimidate entire star systems. That, along with the incredibly large complement of not only fighters, but also ground attack vehicles and other resources, makes this the perfect ship for managing a government. It's really no surprise that the reborn Emperor Palpatine, who had the entire Imperial arsenal at his fingertips, chose the Eclipse-class Super Star Destroyer as his flagship. Next we have the First Order, and I'll be talking about the Supremacy Mega-class Star Destroyer from Star Wars The Last Jedi. I'll try to keep spoilers to a minimum, so if you haven't seen the movie, don't worry. The most notable and obvious thing about the Supremacy is its gargantuan size. With a wingspan of 60 kilometers, it's far larger than any other ship in this video, and would be among the largest in Star Wars Legends. This size brings with it both advantages and disadvantages. On the plus side, the Supremacy has incredible production capabilities. It's basically a mobile shipyard, home planet, and quasi-seat of government all in one. The wingspan also allows the ship to be absolutely covered in weapons, and we see in The Last Jedi that the Mega Star Destroyer is an offensive force. However, the extreme mass of the Mega Star Destroyer also means that it's very slow. This is a direct detriment to the First Order in The Last Jedi, where the Mega Star Destroyer is unable to catch another ship, and its supporting fleet, which realizes presumably how large of a target the MSD would be unprotected, is unable to break ranks. The Supremacy truly is, even more than the Eclipse, a barely movable space station. And I think that it's so large when compared to the standard First Order ship that it actually becomes somewhat of a liability. I won't go into details because I don't want to spoil The Last Jedi for anyone who hasn't seen it, but although the First Order have developed a new technology, it's not unique to the Supremacy. For that reason, I don't know if I should consider it in relation to the quality of the Supremacy, but I will say it doesn't have anything like the super laser of the Eclipse or the yet to be discussed ion cannon of the Malevolence. Moving on now, we have the New Republic from Star Wars Legends, their largest and most powerful ship, and the one you could probably most accurately call their flagship, was the Viscount class Star Defender. The Viscount is fairly easy to understand. It's essentially an upgraded version of the Executor class Super Star Destroyer. It's a similar length, it's got similar amount of weapons, but has more impressive shielding and hull strength. It can also be used with a substantially smaller crew. In no way is the Viscount a liability in battle, like you could argue the Mega Star Destroyer is. Mon Calamari ships are phenomenally designed, with firing arcs covering the entire ship, a decent mass to speed ratio, top of the line technology, and the ability to carry hundreds of, if not thousands of starfighters into battle. Viscounts could operate effectively as part of a fleet, but also on their own. We see during the Yuuzhan Vong War that Viscounts were, on many occasions, responsible for single-handedly holding off Yuuzhan Vong fleets. The Viscount class Star Defender is truly one of the greatest ships in Star Wars Legends. Does that however mean that it's the greatest flagship? Well, that's up for debate. It's less massive than the Executor class Dreadnought and certainly less massive than the Eclipse, which does somewhat limit, at least comparatively, its options when conquering worlds or doing other things that you'd expect a flagship to do. It is, after all, called the Defender for a reason, and not just because Dreadnought or Super Star Destroyer sounds angry. The Viscount also doesn't have any one key feature like the Eclipse or the Malevolence, but it does have top-of-the-line technology in its hull design and shielding. I also like the Viscount's heavy focus on fighter carrying, which surpasses that of even the Executor class Dreadnoughts. Finally, we have the Subjugator class heavy cruiser for the Confederacy of Independent Systems. In the Clone Wars TV show, we see the Malevolence, but in Legends there were several other variants floating around the galaxy somewhere. This ship is absolutely and totally out of its league in this matchup. I really only included it because people ask all the time for me to put the Malevolence against other ships, notwithstanding the fact that I've already done so several times and that it always loses. In the areas of firepower, defensive capabilities, and fighter carrying, the Malevolence is admittedly better than its other Confederate counterparts. However, in all areas, it pales in comparison to the other ships on this list. Where the Supremacy, the Eclipse, or the Viscount are dozens of times larger than the standard ships within their navy, the Malevolence or the Subjugator line generally is only 1 or 2 times as large. The same is true when looking at firepower or any of the other metrics that I mentioned earlier. The Subjugator instead focuses on an ion cannon weapon. Now, this weapon is fairly powerful, but as I've said in previous videos, I do believe it would run into problems when facing off against larger ships. Admittedly though, during the Clone Wars it was effective and was capable of taking down entire Republic fleets on its own. In fact, we do only see the Malevolence destroyed because of the lack of an escort fleet and insufficient protection against fighters. These are areas where the flagship would be protected if used properly. However, I do think the ship over-relies on its ion cannons, a weapon which, as we see during the Malevolence arc as the Clone Wars, is certainly not without flaws. Compare that with the Eclipse, for example. Yes, it has the super laser, and yes, the super laser is an important part of the ship. However, even without, the Dreadnought is an offensive juggernaut. In fact, in the Dark Empire series of comics where the Eclipse was introduced, it's not even clear that it has a super laser. It's just intimidating based on its size, its weaponry, and its defensive capabilities. I would have liked the Malevolence to be larger. The ion cannons are good and I still would have liked it to include them, but I would have liked a more focus on traditional firepower, carrying capacity, and shielding. I believe the ion cannon of the Malevolence is only effective against ships up to a certain size. I've explained this in previous videos, so I won't go over it here, but what that means to me is that if the Confederacy faces off against another fleet with a proper flagship at its center, it will be in big trouble. With a basic understanding of the factions and their ships, let's now rank them from best to worst. Coming in at number 1 is the Eclipse class Super Star Destroyer. The Eclipse is great. It does have weaknesses when fighting alone. It's not very fast, it's not super movable, and the entire ship has to be repositioned to fire the laser, but in a fleet, these problems are easily mitigated against. The laser is powerful enough to one-shot any Star Wars ship in existence, and the Eclipse is also one of the heaviest and most massive ships in Star Wars Legends, bringing with it an incredible amount of firepower, resources, and defensive capabilities. At number 2, we have the Viscount class Star Defender. It was tough choosing between this one and the number 3 spot, but I ended up going with the Viscount because it is just such a phenomenal, well-rounded ship. Mon Calamari ships are always top of the line in the areas of design, shielding, and hull strength, and the Viscount is no exception to these rules. With its also impressive firepower and carrying capacity, it's easily capable of taking down an Executor class Super Star Destroyer and works very effectively as the center of a fleet. All in all, the Viscount is more suited for fighting a war rather than running a government like the Supremacy, but we see just how effective the ship can be during the Yuuzhan Vong War. At number 3 is the Mega Star Destroyer, of which we see the Supremacy in Episode 8. The Supremacy is an absolutely gargantuan ship. While it does bring with it some benefits, including a large amount of firepower, carrying capacity, and the ability to transfer resources across the galaxy, it does somewhat hamper it in battle. We see in The Last Jedi that because of its size, the Supremacy is not only itself unable to catch a smaller ship, but its escort ships have to remain with it, otherwise they leave it undefended. Also, even with that huge size, a single shot at the Eclipse's super laser is likely to cripple, if not completely destroy the ship. I'd also be interested to see what a very mobile Viscount class Star Defender could do against the Supremacy one-on-one. Finally, we have the Subjugator line of cruisers. I believe these ships rely too heavily on their ion cannons, which, as we see during the Clone Wars, are not foolproof. Although having an escort fleet would help protect against some of the problems experienced by the Malevolence, I still do think that the ion cannon isn't up to task when facing heavier ships, and that a fleet with a proper flagship like the Eclipse or the Viscount would be able to take down the Malevolence and then its supporting ships. For that reason, I put the Confederacy at number 4. Those, however, are just my opinions. I would love to hear what you guys think. Which faction had the best flagship, which had the worst, and of course, which episodes would you like to see in the future? Let me know all of that and more down in the comments. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, this has been EckhartsLadder. May the Force be with you.